Before I introduce today's guest, I want to share a few invitations with you, dear listener. First, if you haven't yet tuned into the interlude episode that came just before this one, I encourage you to give it a listen. It offers a woven reflection on the first year of the podcast, blending the voices of past guests with my own to shape a living narrative of what this project has been about thus far. Second, this June, I will be gathering an intimate group of 6 folks to journey together into the heart of impermanence, into deeper reverence and allyship with death. This online container is called A Year to Live. It's a year-long commitment to consciously navigate life as if this were our last year, alongside resonant souls. As the months unfold, we will deepen our intimacy with life, tend to what remains unfinished, and culminate in a ritual death and rebirth. Each month will include 2 group sessions and at least one one-on-one session with me for each participant. I'll speak more about this in the coming weeks, but if your curiosity is sparked, feel free to reach out and we'll set up a free orientation call to see if it's a good fit. I know this will be a truly transformative threshold experience, and I'm looking forward to welcoming whoever feels called to journey with us. Third, I'm hosting another virtual event on May 31st. While I'm still confirming the guest speakers and final details, the event is titled Rise and Revitalize, an online gathering to enliven and embrace the wild bloom of becoming. I already know it's going to be something special. I've created a preliminary event page so you can find that and links to everything else I've mentioned through the show notes. Lastly, I've started a Substack publication called Hearthwoven. I haven't posted anything just yet, but the first essay will be out soon. Hearthwoven will be a space for essays, poetry, podcast episodes, and bonus content, including extended conversations from the podcast eventually. It will be a slow burn at first, but I'd love to have you there as an early subscriber. For now, everything will be free, and down the line, I'll likely add a modest paywall for certain offerings to help sustain the creative energy behind all that I am creating. And now, let's turn to the episode at hand. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Te Tayari, and today's guest is Wahinkpe Topa. In this conversation, we explore kinship as a foundational way of being, one rooted in reverence, humility, and right relationship with the living, animate world. Wahinkpe Topa draws from Indigenous wisdom, personal healing journeys, and decades of ceremonial work to illuminate pathways of reconnection with earth, spirit, and each other. We touch on his near-death experience, the power of hypnotic communication, and how fear can become a transformative ally. Along the way, Wahinkpe Topa offers reflections on reincarnation, self-hypnosis, and living with integrity and courage. At its heart, this is a conversation about remembering who we are. Spirited beings, enmeshed in a sentient web of life. Wahinkpe Topa, also known as Four Arrows, is a maid relative of the Oglala Lakota and a former director of education at Oglala Lakota College. He is internationally known for his scholarly publications and presentations about practical applications of our original nature-based kinship worldview, such as described in the title of one of his 24 books, Restoring the Kinship Worldview. Indigenous voices introduce 28 precepts for balancing life on planet Earth. He lives in Mexico with his artist wife and their numerous non-human friends. And for episode 24, just so you know, I hosted Wahinkpe Topa's colleague Darsha Narvaez. Together, they co-authored Restoring the Kinship Worldview. I recommend tuning into that conversation as well, where we explore our deep human need for nestedness. If you're new to the show, you might like to know that I'm a threshold counselor with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as support around death and dying. To learn more, visit my website through the link in the show notes, and know that I also offer free insight calls, which provide a risk-free opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and determine if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other during a pivotal time in your life. I'm generally open to connecting via email and video chat if you feel naturally drawn to do so, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or any other meaningful reason. Feel free to reach out at any time. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your preferred podcast platform, and know that your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only deeply appreciated, they are vital for supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's welcome Wahinkpe Topa into this humble web of connection that we are weaving together, to be inspired to live with more courage, more heart, less fear, and a renewed sense of kinship in this wild, wild world. Yeah, you were telling me a bit about where you're at and the kind of living situations that you're in at this point in your life, and it got me wondering about what it was like growing up for you. I'd be so curious to know a bit about your roots before we get into some of the other topics that I'm really excited to explore with you today. So if you care to share whatever feels meaningful to you, so that we have some rootedness at the beginning here, we'd be grateful for that.
My Irish lineage is Jacobs. I'm Donald Trent Jacobs is my born name. St. Louis, Missouri. Grew up in the county there. No access to indigeneity except a few friends that took me horse riding once in a while, but they were cowboys, right? And so Marine Corps, 1969, honorable discharge, big chip on my shoulder about the lies of Vietnam. So I took off to California, whitewater kayaking, wild, I ultimately got into wild horse training and doing 100-mile endurance rides. Had a near-death experience on the Rio Urique here in Mexico. The Radomuri Cimarron people saved my life. Came back a changed person in many ways. If your audience goes on YouTube and puts in the horse hypnotist, they'll see me with a wild Mustang on a television program hypnotizing back in many, many years ago.
Okay.
And so anyway, I wanted to understand better what I had experienced in the near-death experience. And I went back many years later, about 15 years later, to the place to see the Radomuri Indian people who had actually saved my partner and I. We were firefighters at the time. I was working on my first doctorate, and we were never got out of this 8,000-foot canyon, which is deeper than the Grand Canyon. And people can also look at that on YouTube if they go to the Shaman's Message, Part 1, 2, and 3. And so I learned, from my time with them, another way to be in the world, another way to belong to the world. And quit what I was doing as a sports psychologist at the time and firefighter before that. And with my first doctorate, I gave up the health psychology, and then went back and got my second doctorate in education and curriculum with a focus on Indigenous worldview. And that, is kind of what I started doing. I've got many, many, many publications on it. I was invited to speak to the United Nations recently about my worldview chart that was in our last book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview. And so, that's a snapshot that I could give, that was a 50-year snapshot.
Well done too. I wasn't aware of your near-death experience, and of course, I'm sure that that's sacred and mysterious ground for you. But I wonder if there's something you could share from that, because I think it's anyone who comes across some of these stories become fascinated by the content of them. And I'm wondering, you said that that really shifted your paradigm and your orientation to life. Um, are there some threads you'd care to share, like that were particularly transformational? And also, maybe up front, I'm sure that you went and looked into or heard about other near-death experiences to try to make sense of it. And I wonder if you read or heard similarities and were able to confirm certain things in that experience, in terms of sharing sharing patterns with other folks that have gone through similar experiences.
Well, I'm happy that you asked that question because it's an important one
Yeah.
for all of us, and that's why you asked it. So good for
Yeah.
you. Well, Dave and I were heading down the river. It was about 1,500 cubic feet per second per minute, and small. It was like that's pretty safe waters. But we came to a lot of really steep places where there was not enough water. We had to portage, and we had to deflate our boats. We had to bring our backpacks and the boats and the paddles on rough climbs over the rocks to get down to a place where we could start paddling again. So I said to David, I said, wow, this is so beautiful here. We're the first people to have tried this ascent. There's no way of knowing what was ahead. So that's why we had to scout all the time. And I said, I just wish there was more rain or more water. And it's raining. It just started pouring. It's almost like magically after I said it. Dave, you're 4,000 cubic feet, said, can you tell it to stop now? And I was my turn to observe. I'd climb the rock, hold on to my boat, look downstream to see which way we should go, river left or river right. And before I got out of the boat, I was cold and afraid and way beyond my skill levels on the class 2 and 3 rapids had become class 4 rapids. And I saw a reverse eddy, or at least what I thought was a reversed eddy. So I dropped into it thinking, wow, I'm lucky I had this turn. Now I can just look downstream and know which way to go. But it wasn't a reverse eddy. The entire river was waiting to go into an underground hole in the bottom of the boulder. And yeah, so anyway, long story short, I had my near-death experience. I won't go into the details, it'll take up too much time, but what was, to your question, had a lot of fear and a lot of energy to try to get away by paddling upstream until my boat got stuck in the hole. I turned around, and before I had time to negotiate trying to somehow cling to the rock or climb it, I flipped under. As soon as I flipped under, I felt a peacefulness like I've tried to describe over the last, since that 1980 something. It was just a complete, like, everything is beautiful. And I saw the kinds of things that, you mentioned that I explore afterward. Oh, you bet. And I was shocked when I learned, I came across Ray Moody's book.
Moody, yeah.
And, and he's got, like, I don't know, thousands of stories. And I'm reading each of the stories, and they're all coming as close to mine and I'm going, holy cow. And then, of course, the University of Virginia, the Perceptual Studies program, some Nobel Peace Prize in quantum physics says their research on life after death is as good as any of the quantum physics research, right? So I've spent the last 30 years, until it came to where I lived with Indigenous people on the Pine Ridge with the Lakota, and became a made relative of them, a Honka. And then I saw it firsthand that we are spirits in a body, and we're surrounded by spirits. And so, the spirits that I saw in that cave during the minutes before it spit me out, not knowing if I was going to live or not, almost positive that I was going to die, but it was like, that's okay. I saw my ancestors, I saw relatives, I saw people that were enemies, that were friends. I heard a music. It was all the things that you hear in the literature, And so, sure, it did. When I got back, I had adopted. I was doing 100-mile endurance races on Arabians, which is the best horse for that sport. But we had storyfied from all five of my sisters, all 4 or 5 of my mom's sisters, had told stories about our Cherokee lineage, and I never knew what was true or not, But I always had that little part of me that wondered, and I thought, I'm going to get a Mustang and see if it comes out. Well, I got a Mustang. I couldn't do anything with it. I couldn't, like later when I came back, I was hired by the Bureau of Land Management in California. I was actually out of Susanville to go to people that had adopted wild horses and had the same problem that I did. The halter was hanging out, the rope was hanging off his halter. The halter was growing into their heads if they were 2 or 3-year-olds when they were adopted, which was most of them. And I to go up to that horse and and take it off, and that's what you'll see in the TV thing on YouTube. But that wasn't the case when I left. In fact, one of the reasons I was so frustrated with my inability to get near this horse after I had spent, there's only $125, but I felt sorry for the horse. And I told Dave, I said, hey, let's go try to be the first to go down this river, of course, which we failed. And so the wild horse really taught me a lot. And after that, I started really so many different things. I wrote a book. I was still working as a firefighter. I wrote a book called Patient Communication for First Responders. That was about how you could talk to people. And we had the highest percentage of CPR successes, and witness successes than the national rate. And people would come back and say, hey, I want to thank you for talking to me. I think I'm alive because of that. In fact, it just came out. I'm looking over here. It just came out this was the original book. They wouldn't let me use the word hypnosis in it, but Prentice Hall published it.
Okay.
So I called it Patient Communication for First Responders. I was speaking to 1,500 emergency room physicians. I had my doctorate at that time. And they came to me at lunchtime and said, we can't order your book, Dr. Jacobs. They say it's remainder. I didn't know what that term was, but it meant they took it off the market because someone said this should be only used by licensed medical physicians who are trained and certified in hypnosis, right? So for 25 years, it's been off the market. And then last month, one of my students, who was a paramedic for 20 years, I gave him all rights to the book. I said, it's yours. And he said, no, let me get a publisher for this. So this just came out. And as you can see, hypnotic communication in emergency medical settings, they use the word now, right? And then last week, Germany put it into a German translation. So part of the indigenous understanding of life is that, like on our worldview chart that we'll talk about, I'm sure, one of the things is in the worldview, there's a high respect for women and a low respect for women, right? There's a sense of a hierarchy and non-hierarchy. Well, we got to look at worldviews as a non-binary, because like even though the Lakota are a matriarchy and they are egalitarian, not so during the Buffalo Hunt. Someone is appointed in a hierarchical way. But some people will then ask me, well, what about how in the dominant worldview we have a low respect for women? That's typical all the way throughout colonization. Why would we ever want to be doing that? And I said, no. The reason that this worldview chart is complementary with the high respect for women side of the chart, that is our nature-based spiritual worldview. You'll know that a lot better if you can understand why people have a low respect for women. If you can understand the consequences, you will then be much more likely to really have a genuine, authentic. way. It's like you can't know a mountain without knowing a valley, right?
Mm.
And so that's, all of those kinds of things came from, the changes that happened to me, and that hypnosis, getting back into that, is rejected pretty much by all the Abrahamic religions, who use it on us, essentially, right?
Mm.
And the dictators and authoritarians and the advertisers know how to use it. But we've
Mm.
lost control of that.
Mm.
Whereas indigenous peoples always did ceremony. One of the worldview chart precepts says that on the dominant side, humans are born sinners, essentially, right? That, we have, our nature is warlike, etc. People use that excuse all the time. On the indigenous understanding is, no, we are born sacred. If you look at, about Maslow's contradiction, have you come upon that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where he said only a few people get to self-actualization, whereas
Right.
when he was on the Blackfoot reservation, he found just the opposite, that when you're born, you have it. And
Mm.
never said that until he was older, and he admitted that he couldn't share this pyramid and truth, because he'd have been laughed out of university. His doctoral program degree, wouldn't have been given, and all that stuff. So for many, many years, people have thought that only a few people can get to self-actualization. We're here in 1936 on this Blackfoot reservation. He wrote later, they all were self-actualized because they recognized that, when they were born, and then they promulgated that.
Mm.
So we, on the worldview chart, we say, and this is all based on a lot of scholarship, that indigenous people understand that we are born with a good nature,
Mm-hmm.
but they're highly malleable. And
Mm.
that's why all of our origin stories, which are basically animal stories, or tree or wind stories, or mountain stories, they all are teaching us how we can be jealous, we can be angry, we can be violent, we can be greedy. And therefore, that's why we have to live according to nature's laws, which ultimately are, what Peter Popkin says are about mutual aid.
Mm.
That was a long-winded thing, but it's such an important question to ask, and people don't need to have a near-death experience to come across these wisdoms right now. They can go and study the worldview and practice self-hypnosis, and bingo, and meditation, and you get there.
Right. And thank you for all of that. There's so much there. Yeah, maybe you don't have to have a near-death experience, but there needs to be deaths of some kind, right? Because I kept sensing this, there was your life before the near-death experience, and then something happened where you contacted a deeper, more fundamental aspect of who you are. And that then embedded you into a more fundamental relationship with the living world. And so many folks in the Western world and raised in the culture similar to yours and mine, that we aren't in that self-actualized state upon birth because of our cultural context.
Well,
And
let's
so,
say that we are at birth, but
right,
within seconds it begins to be deteriorating.
that's what I mean.
And also add that probably there's historical trauma in the
Yeah,
fetus
yeah.
that probably also, you're probably right, has a more difficult time for the start. But ultimately, we are spirits that have chosen that fetus and that to be born. In the one book that I showed you, Dr. David Cheek is an obstetrician, and he wrote the foreword for this. He was also president of the very association that the guy that got the book banned was of. But he did get in a lot of trouble himself, because he was president of the American Association of Hypnosis, Clinical Hypnosis. Well, he knew that people couldn't remember when they're born at birth.
Mm.
But he also knew that regression therapy was a common tool for hypnotherapists.
Mm.
Go back to a time when this problem first happened. Go back to a time when you first didn't feel you were interconnected with everyone, or whatever.
Mm.
Or when you when you were afraid of water. And so he had his births that he did. I think it was 140 over his lifetime. He was in his 80s. And he said, well, I have one of the data points that I have is which way were you facing when you came out of the womb? So he says, I can do regressions and then quantify whether they're accurate or not to see if people can, in hypnosis, remember the moment of birth. So it was a legitimate scientific study. So he took it on. And when he wrote his peer-reviewed article on it, he got in a lot of trouble. He got it published, but people shot him down after that because I don't remember whether it was 2 or 3 anomalies were in it, who essentially, to cut the story short, said, well, I'm not being born now. I'm trying to decide if these are the parents I want. And he was blown away by that, as I was when I first heard it. And he said, but, I don't know whether they were fabricating that for some reason, which is, I don't know whether the success that we have on regressions. Now, when I was a hypnotherapist and I taught at UC Berkeley, I had a lot that, wow, when they were in a different place and they went back to before this lifetime. And I mean, they had accents and knowledges and facial expressions and tones completely different. So I always tended to think that this concept of incarnation was probably real. We don't really know how it works. The Eastern people say you don't come back as a human, but a study out of University of British Columbia called Amerindian rebirthing, when they did their research with children that had remembered or had prophesied or whatever, it was about 40% came back as trees or frogs or whales or or something. So who knows? I mean, we don't know. I mean, Richard Bach told me one time, who was the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, he said, for us, this idea of reincarnation, we got to get rid of time. Einstein says that time is an illusion, albeit a stubborn one. I said, what do you mean, Rich? He said, well, imagine you're in a store and there's 100 televisions in a circle around you. Each one's on a different movie and each one's a different time zone, past, present, and future. I said, yeah. He said, whichever one you're tuned into for some reason is the life that you lived. Well, I didn't get that at all. I mean, not at all. And over many years, I kind of get it now. It's not that easy. But yeah, so I think that you're absolutely right. In order to move away from the hypnosis of the dominant worldview, it's the only thing that can explain poisoning our air, poisoning our water, doing violence, doing genocide like in Gaza. I got fired, by the way, at my most recent university, which I went to for 4 months because of my stand on Gaza and stand against their neutrality. But people can get that without a near-death experience, right? A near-death physical experience, like something that extreme. Yeah. They can have a reframing of the neural pathways that are so grooved in. Imagine a 52-year-old professor, man or woman, and I've had both, who is intelligent, good-hearted, and can't get in a bathtub for fear of drowning. And you go, and they can say, well, look, I know when I had my near death when I was a year old, that I can see how that could happen. I know it couldn't happen now. I don't think, but, and the trance logic comes into it. Trance logic is what we do when we make decisions that are completely anti-nature, and we're making constantly and more now because the hypnosis deepens these grooves, if you will, and so we got to change them. Indigenous people understood if they wanted to be more generous, if they wanted to hunt better, if they wanted to make baskets better, we had to give gratitude for the sun and the moon. We had to give gratitude. We had to say, how do we practice making generosity the highest form of courage? And so we did ceremonies all the time. And ceremonies really are a form of this self-hypnosis, right? And so people, we can do this. We can do it with self-hypnosis. We can reshape this. We can do it in community. And we can, maybe with a fearlessness of death, which is a really important thing. Gandhi said, this is a book that was written about my work that came out. And I didn't read it in 6 years because I don't know, a false sense of humility, or maybe I thought he was going to say something I didn't like. But Dr. Fisher has got about 150 footnotes at the end of every chapter. And in this, I finally read it after 6 years. I'm going to read it. And it's really not so much about me as it is my theories. And I came upon a quote that Dr. Fisher put in from Gandhi that said, the prerequisite for spirituality is fearlessness. Well, I've been saying that from learning from the Laramuri and the Kuhak and the Kogi, people that I've lived with, and saying it for years. But Western mindset is that fearlessness is foolishness. Even Socrates said that, which is understandable. I mean, you can see the rationalization for that. But in the indigenous way, we start with the fear that comes, and it's a gift. Oh, thank you, fear, for letting me know that this is happening so I can run or fight. But then right away, the motion, which is the word in emotion of fear, is moved into practicing a virtue: generosity, patience, fortitude, humility, honesty, courage. Just the opposite in the dominant way, right? And so fearlessness means we move from fear into courage. And with that courage, we make a decision, and then we go up to the plate, up to the boss, up to Standing Rock, up to the people that are hitting you with batons. But once you take the action of jumping off that cliff, then if you hold on to the courage to do it, you'll burn out. If you move into trusting the universe, which is what Gandhi and the indigenous people also understand fearlessness to be, it is, okay, we've made a commitment, an action, we're going to trust the universe. And maybe in a way, trusting that universe is causing the death to these old ways. You could frame it that way, I guess, but it's accessible to all of this when we start realizing that we're spirits in a body. We have this naturalistic tool that has, been taken away from us when we were 5, when we could learn 10 languages, by the time we were 5 because of it. We can use this tool. We don't have to pay someone. You can take a string and paper clip. Dental floss and paper clip works great. And you've probably played with a pendulum before, where it goes in a circle automatically or whatever, like a Ouija board. Well, the reason that works isn't that there's necessarily a spirit. Sometimes spirit can affect you, what you're thinking, but that's not moving this. This is simply ideomotor neurons that Edmund Jacobson discovered in 1939, that when a tennis player was hooked up to an EEG machine and served a tennis ball, certain things went on in the brain. Then he brought them back to the lab, had them sit on a table, hypnotized them with the same wiring, and just had them imagine serving. Same things went over. So so the ideomotor are enough to move this in a circle, but they won't happen if you're not in a lower brainwave frequency. And the definition of hypnosis that I can give everybody is believing deeply in an image, which Einstein says is more powerful than knowledge, when you're in a lower brainwave frequency. You can imagine it all day and nothing's going to happen if you're in the a frequency like we're now, beta. But if you go into a meditative state, and meditation and hypnosis are the same, except meditation doesn't have that directive and an intention to take action. It's there to clear the mind. It's very important, and it's you doing both is what you want to do. But so everybody can learn it. So while this thing is spinning, if you have a predetermined directive, say you want to quit smoking, and you say, okay, and you got to frame it right. You have to understand it. I have a new practice now since I left the university. I'm teaching people 90 minutes a week on Zoom around the world how to do self-hypnosis, how to use the worldview chart to know what the directives to give so that you're not using hypnosis to continue the problem, right? And so far, I've only been doing it for 2 months, and the results have been like what I expected. So while this is going, if you have that carefully worded directive, like say, when I reach for that cigarette, automatically my hand's going to stop when I reach out, and I'm going to think a moment about the beauty of the gift of breath that the ocean and trees are giving me. If you can double task. If you keep this thing going while you're doing this, that's like paying me $300 or $400 an hour, right? Back in the day, that was that when I did that, right? So, so what we're looking at here is a way of being on this planet, in this universe, that recognizes our deep interconnectedness with everything in nature and gives respect to the sentience of everything from a rock to an ant to the wind. And right now we're so far away from that, but people are getting it. People are getting it.
Yeah. So like what I'm hearing is that this dominant paradigm is one of separation. It's an identification with this smaller sense of self, and that underneath all of that, always, forever, is this deep, interrelated, interconnected, grander self that isn't just a self per se, but it's a relationship, it's a process, and that there's deep intelligence and wisdom and medicine and magic in that deeper self, and that we can consciously shift our orientation, our identification, to identify and live with that sense of self, that deeper sense of self. And that's what you call the kinship worldview, because when you begin to identify with that deeper self, you have to be intimately touched by the interrelatedness of that deep self. And so everything becomes kin in that way, because you aren't separate. You can't hold yourself as separate anymore. And that means that everything is affecting you and you're affecting everything else. And so then you rely on each other in deep, mysterious ways. And so when you talk about restoring the kinship worldview, that word restoring is so important, because it to me, it means that it never went away. It's not gone. You don't have to create it. It's already there. It's always been there. It's more of a turning toward intending so as to bring it into a renewal cycle, and to bring it back into life. Could we talk more about that? Like, what does it mean to restore this identity that is based in the kinship worldview?
Well, your narrative there was very beautiful and right on target. That idea of restoring a life that is interconnected truly can be represented with so many stories that I have. But one of them, when Trump was being elected, or possibly elected in the first round, I had a lot of, well, I'll just go to this story. One of my psychology friends called me up and said, look, we know what we think about what he's probably going to do and how this could lead to fascism or whatever. But somebody's got to stop this vitriol and you understand that we're all connected, that we're all interrelated. I'm taking this extreme example because extreme examples help sometimes. He said, could you do a minute audio video. I'm going to put on YouTube that can say something nice about Donald Trump. And I had just watched the program on Democracy Now! Where Amy Goodman had interviewed his biographer, who was on his deathbed. I don't know if you remember seeing that or not, but he was on his deathbed. There was all these journalists downstairs going through boxes and boxes of notes about this guy that was running for president in 2016. And she said, I don't remember his name, but you can find it easily enough. She said, so why are you letting all of us in as reporters, to find and to read your materials and bring them back to life? You've 36 years, you've been his biographer. And he only had a few days to live. And he was letting this happen. And he said, Amy, he said, Donald, that's how he called him. He said, Donald's not going to be dangerous for the United States. He's going to be dangerous for the world. So this was where I'm thinking, and I'll get somebody say something nice about him. So I thought about a time when I was running a ranch, and my wife and I would go down to this beautiful creek that was just pristine, and I had a wolf dog that used to go out and try to catch minnows. And one day I saw a pile of beer cans on this little island on the other side of the creek, and I was still had my old Marine Corps chip on my shoulders to some degree. And so if I see whoever did that, well, I saw a couple of Mexican fellas that were drinking beers, and I thought, if they throw those over there, I know who's doing it. And sure enough, one of them did. So I get up and my wife said, honey, please, and I not just. So I walked over there, and then something came to me, and I said, hola, boys, and they said, hola. And I said, it's a beautiful place here. Yeah. And I pointed far away at one mountain. I said, that's a beautiful mountain, right? And they said, si, senor. And I did the same thing in all directions, saving the beer cans for last. And I went, and I just looked at them. And it was like a light went on. Long story short, those two guys, for the next 2 years that we were working at that place, you could see them on the street picking up beer cans. I mean, they were like, it totally awakened. Yeah. And I realized, we just don't know. We're hypnotized that it's okay. We're in a way ignorant of these things, right? So I said, well, basically to make it, short and minute, I said, if I had the same father as Donald Trump, if I had the same teachers, the same environment, all of those things that he grew up with, who's to say that I wouldn't have the same kinds of attitudes, right? Right. And so I think what this idea is that, should we protest? Absolutely. I did 4 tours of at Standing Rock. I won the Moral Courage Award from the Morton Springer Institute for my activism. Yeah, a protest. Got to do it with this, what you're saying, this true sense of being a self that is interconnected with all of the and that means, like one of the books I've got over here, I got 24 books over here that I wrote. This is one I wrote with a man who was a professor at Loyola, Walter Block. I've disagreed with everything he said, and very libertarian, who very extreme views. He's he's written a lot of books like I have. He's a professor, honored professor at Loyola. So I said, I want you to write a book with me. I already got a contract for it. It's called Differing Worldviews in Higher Education's Two Scholars Argue Cooperatively About Education. Yeah. Now, not everybody agrees with what I did. Alice Walker, the famous poet and author of The Color Purple, she's my neighbor here in Mexico. And I was playing music with her partner at the time, was a trumpet player, and I played jazz. And so I went over there and I gave her a copy, an autographed copy of this book. She thumbed through it in a waste can right in front of me. She says, "You're in bed with the devil."
Oh, right.
Bless her heart. Yeah. It's like, I get that. I mean, the anger and wisdom behind the color purple tells the whole story, right? And so she felt that I was giving him a voice, whereas, I think that there was something else that happened. Now, there were things in there that like once I asked him, he said, if you want to really save animals, then you got to privatize. And we talked about that. And then so what about whales? And, anyway, I didn't want to, I kept having this urge to debate, and I had to, my wife would have to come in and give me a massage and calm me down, right? Because she said, honey, this was your idea to write this book, yeah. And so, all right, Walter, I said, back and forth on the typewriter. It sounds like you think only humans have intrinsic value, thinking that he would then, in explaining, I would learn how he can have these ideas. But he writes me back, and essentially he says, I won't look it up, but essentially he says, it's been an enjoyment to write this book with you. I think we've learned from both one another, but I'm surprised that you asked me that. Of course, only humans have intrinsic value. Everything else on earth is utilitarian for humans. Well, at that point in time, I was sorry I was writing the book. I kind of agreed with Alice, but I didn't really, because I thought, wait a minute, what an awakening this is. Capitalism does that. It chooses between the quarterly profit and the clean river.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, he's sharing with me the philosophy that I didn't think anybody had. But now I'm realizing, because of having written this book, that most of us have it in some way. Our systems certainly have it, right? And so I think that staying on our task is that we can move into a direction of peace with ourselves, peace with the world, when we and I know how difficult it is. People don't talk about hypnosis. It's one of those words that that my Prentice Hall wouldn't let me use. But if we don't get it, if we don't understand that Indigenous, for 99% of human history, our ancestors, if you go back 10,000 years or more, our ancestors did ceremony, which is a form of hypnosis based on our definition, right? And so there's other forms of it, lots of different forms of it that we can do, but we have to know what to change. Therefore, after you talk, I'll introduce the cat fawn as briefly as I can, which is two of the animals I had coming out of the canyon, a mountain lion and a baby deer, Tarahumara, and how they turned into neon lights and gave me the start of this combination of worldview and trance-based learning. So,
okay, yes,
I must have got a question out of you there somewhere.
Oh, for sure, man. And I'm excited to hear that story. I have a few thoughts, so let me kind of stumble for some moments.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love that. So, I've also been, I've given my energy to activism in some big ways in the past. I actually went to Canadian federal prison for some days for standing up completely peacefully in the biggest act of civil disobedience to date in Canada, up at Fairy Creek on Vancouver Island.
Yep.
And the reason why I bring that up is because you brought up, you still have to be active in the world, meaning you still need to stand up for what you know is right, for a cause, for something that's bigger than you. You need to give yourself to it with that warrior energy. But the thing is people get confused and they think that being a warrior means that you're driven by hate for the other, that you need to win over the other. But what you're speaking to, and something that I'm continuously learning, is that what's that quote? I'm forgetting it, but it's something like, only love, like only hate can be overcome by love alone. That the things that are life denying, that are degrading life and the beauty of life and the sanctity of life, that we're not going to change that and compost it for the new by hating it and by coming at it with rage and anger, but by using that anger and that pain and transmuting it into what I think is the deeper current that holds it, which is love for life. And you access that love by deepening in to that deeper self, by deepening into the recognition that all things are interrelated, all things are kin. And that naturally, there's a natural upwelling of love. And then you can't help but serve. You can't help but serve. But from that perspective, that orientation, your service is not going to be one that adds fuel to the fire, but brings the loving, healing waters to the fire. So I can stand up and be in service. I can be a warrior, but I know that it's because I love life. And that changes the game completely. And, you know, I think that's such an important lens too, to view like Trump and these people that we that incite so much anger in us because we think you're so disconnected, you know, you're so you deny life at every turn. And we can get angry and frustrated and hate these people, but that's just adding to that dissonance. And so how could we ever come into coherence in that way? And so I think that it's the heart's wisdom that will ever bring it, that will be the only power that can ever bring us into that kind of coherence that might lead to a more loving, peaceful, interrelated world. And, you know, I want to say one more thing with those Mexican men. I think the incredible wisdom that you showed in that experience and the way that you pivoted in that moment where you came toward them and you were angry, but then you recognized, but wait, that's not going to help by putting fire into the fire. So what are the healing, cooling waters, loving waters of this moment? Oh, well, look where we are, you know, and you directed their energy and their attention toward things that they could feel love and connection to. And I think that's something that is a real issue in the environmental issues of today, is that people are angry, rightfully so, because the sanctity of life has been like battered over and over again. And so the reaction is, well, look at all these things that are going wrong. Look at all the damage. Look at all the pain. Look at all the injustice. Don't you feel angry about that? Don't you want to make change? And I think that that's misguided, because the deeper current is, would suggest to people, hey, look out at life. Like, reflect on the moments where you've been touched by the livingness of the world. Like, what causes you to know the sacredness of life and to feel love for your life and for the life of the many others that we share it with? It's like that. Go into that, because then that's going to guide you naturally toward your unique service in the world. And it's going to,
I think it will. And if I may offer a modification in what we call language and words, because remember, fawn stands for fear, authority, words, and nature. All right, and differences in worldview. The word love, when we use the word love as a noun, you're really thinking of it when you say the noun as an action word. So what you're saying has validity. But for the average person who tucks it away as a noun, it doesn't have the vibrational frequency that's needed. There is no word for love in Lakota. There's no word for love in Diné. There's no word. I haven't found the word love in any of the indigenous languages in my scholarly work.
So what do you find that comes close to it?
They have words for loving by the dozens and dozens and dozens. In other words, love as a noun, for some reason they just realized, well, what is that? Love as an action. Oh man, it's just all over the place, right? And so it sounds like, we usually dismiss something. Well, that's just semantics. But in my vision of the cat and fawn, words became powerful, and I realized the vibrational frequency of words. I had a client a long time ago called me, wanted to come because he sweated under his arms before he goes into a meeting. I said, well, what do you say to yourself? What do you mean? He says, well, what words do you say? He said, I look at my watch and say, I have to go to a meeting. I must go to a meeting. I need to go to a meeting. I said, okay, appointment with you, but here's something I want you to do in the meantime. Change the word need or must or have to I want. See what happens. This happened to doctors of every kind, right? Taking drugs. He cancels the appointment with me 5 days later and asks my secretary, how much do I owe him? and she said, well, you didn't come. He said, yeah, but he must have hypnotized me on the phone. I haven't sweated in 5 days. The simple statement of that, right?
Yeah.
And so words are really crucial. We don't have enough time today to go into detail on that, but words are so crucial. But if people could start thinking, wow, what I listened to Mr. How do I say Tagliari?
Tagliari.
Yeah. Okay. So I listened to his podcast with Four Arrows, and he was talking about this, how important the word love is when it's an action word, and we think of it as an action word, right? And so I think that's one thing is that idea. The other is that we don't have to be good friends with somebody that is somebody different, but if that works that way, it happens. I've got several friends that I think are beautiful people who I've grew up, their family has grown up with me. I love them, and they're Trump supporters, and it's like, it's kind of my mind. So I introduced one of them the other day, and I said, I want you to meet somebody who's a grandfather of the greatest family you could ever imagine. They all play polo here. They're all doing this. They play music. I said, with the exception of their politics, so I get it in. I don't play, being afraid. And this as an activist yourself. I was part of the Vets for Peace who were involved at Standing Rock to teach the guys coming over from Iraq and Afghanistan, who are still soldiers or Marines, to not get angry and not be hateful when they go on the line. In other words, I wouldn't let them go up on the line with the guys with all the shields and their batons and their rubber bullets and the Raytheon machine that made you throw up. I said, here's your milk of magnesia to put into somebody's eyes if that happens. But this is how you do it. Well, they would go up on the line. These guys are just, young guys from Iraq, and they would go to the people on the other side, that maybe hit a woman, which happened once in a while, or sprayed them with pepper spray. While you're putting that magnesia in, right? Look over at that person. You're going to have anger. You've been trained as a soldier. You're going to want to get over and kick him in the nuts, and what happened to you, right? I said, but what I want you to do is get to your heart and talk what the truth is. And the truth is something like this. And hey, my brother, I know that you got this job. You've got a family. You need this job. I understand that. But, you're the enemy to all of us who you're working for, and it's kind of talk that way, sympathetically, empathetically. Well, during the 4 times I was there, I saw 15 people put their shields down and their guns down and their helmets off and walk away. I mean, that's a small percentage, but by golly, that's the person that, that did it because of those kinds of things. If they had been attacked, they'd have gotten more entrenched with their job, right? And you also mentioned something in your beautiful statement about heart wisdom, on the worldview chart, right? Number 8 is on the common kinship indigenous worldview manifestations. These are things that we're manifesting in education, corporate, sports, media, all that stuff that we buy into, even if we don't agree. But number 8 is an emphasis on heart wisdom versus in the dominant worldview manifestations, the emphasis on intellect. And that's a hard one for an academic like me, right? That's something that you also talked about, that heart wisdom is where the loving action takes place. So I know that we're at the close of our time, but people can look up the cat fawn. Cat fawn, simply, cat is the hypnosis, concentration activated transformation that Indigenous people understood as vital, just like the wild animals that we learned them from. Fawn means, how am I using a dominant approach to fear, authority, words, and nature versus the Indigenous? Study the chart on that. Go to our website, worldviewliteracy.org. Download the chart for free. Come back in 3 months and fill out our survey and see how it's changing your life.
Yeah, and if people think that if they don't have a trust in this sense of hypnosis, it's like, just think about like what happens when you watch a television program, or when you listen to music, or you listen to a story, or you get into a deep conversation with someone that you love. Like, those are moments of trance, like deep hypnotic states, and like that's happening all the time. And so what you're saying, just to be clear, is you can bring more consciousness to that, and you can root it into a deeper, more broader sense of self, so as to guide that process toward life-affirming transformative processes. Is that, yeah. Okay, so we're at the end here, and there's just so much I want to ask you, man. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I think at the end, it feels best for me to ask maybe some advice of some sorts, or something essential that you think is essential for these times to remember right now. You've had a long, beautiful life. I would consider you an elder, and I'm just wondering, what is it that feels most essential for you at these times for people to remember or to consider as we move into this what feels like a really increasingly chaotic time of development and geopolitics and technological advancement. From your perspective, what do you think is essential for folks to carry with them?
Well, you may not like my answer, and I don't.
I'm cool with that.
And because certainly I have experience with people not liking the answer initially. I was presenting at UBC in Vancouver around the time of COVID to the education department. And when at the end they said, well, so 4 arrows, do you think that we can turn things around if we really use your worldview chart as you've explained to us? And I just came out of me. I said, no, I don't think so. And they went from loving me to hating me in that moment. You get the hands went up. Why are you here? You donate your royalties to for your books. I mean, why do you write them? Why are you doing this work? And I quoted Sitting Bull in a little book I wrote called Sitting Bull's Words for a World in Crisis. Sitting Bull was asked the same question. Why do you do your ceremonies? Why do you sing your songs? Are you generous to people that have put you in prison? Why? And he says, because I want to be a human being. And and so I said, we've got to change our definition of hope. You guys are all asking that question with the definition we usually use for hope, that certainty of a good outcome. That's what I'm hoping for. Without hope, we're lost, is what you hear almost from every wonderful person that we like and that we respect. That's what they say. We've got to have hope. Well, what I'm finding is that with that hope and with your brain, you come to a juncture of burnout. Hope doesn't match. No, the carbon footprint is not getting better. No, the oceans are not getting cleaner, etc. And so I don't think there's much of a chance at all that we're going to turn things around before a great, great calamity. Now, it's possible. I don't know. I mean, anything is possible, perhaps. But I'm loving to see the awakening that's happening now. But I don't think it's going to be sufficient. That said, well, where do I go from there? Redefine hope as not the certainty of an outcome, but the certainty that what you're doing is the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah.
And with that kind of hope definition, people are calling me from that conference and saying, you know, I was pissed off at you at the time, but it's helped me now. I'm not burning out. I'm probably being more of an activist. I'm more compassionate. And so I think that's a good starting place. And I'll leave you with that. Let me say a quick prayer, and then I've got on quarter of the hour. I got to go.
Okay.
So much, and I'll see you up this summer in Vancouver on Vancouver Island.
Yes.
Oten kashila wakantanka nama kompo na te tewa topo onshimaka ahituan kelo. Oyate oyasin chanko luto akhnamani owichakiapo. Oyate oyasin unchi wichatopo na oichakiapo. Helcho wichozani washte unyapiktelo. Ihani la ko wichohanki tonkashila kiksuye. Metako yo yasin. Metako yo yasin.